never meant to live a lie. At first, it was just small deceptions, things I told myself didn't really matter. A white lie here, a misdirection there, all to avoid confrontation. But over time, the mask I wore became a second skin. I grew up in a strict household, where tradition was law and anything outside those boundaries was a threat. My true beliefs, my real self, had no place in that world, so I buried them deep. I learned to say the right things, nod in agreement when needed, and suppress every impulse that might reveal the truth. It wasn't just about survival, it was about acceptance. The fear of being cast out was too great, so I let myself become someone else, someone my family and society expected me to be. But the weight of it all grew heavier with time. Every conversation felt rehearsed, every smile forced. I couldn't enjoy the things I loved openly. I had to fake interest in things I didn't care about just to fit in. And then one day I met someone who saw through it. A friend, someone who noticed the cracks in my facade. "You don't really believe all that, do you?" they asked one night, catching me off guard. My heart pounded. For the first time in years, I felt exposed. The question haunted me. Was I really willing to live like this forever? The more I spoke with my friend, the harder it became to maintain the illusion. For years I had mastered the art of deception, slipping into my role so naturally that even I sometimes believed it. But now, with every conversation, I felt like I was unraveling. My friend asked questions no one else had dared to. If you weren't afraid, what would you really say? What would you really do? At first I brushed it off, laughing as if the thought was ridiculous. But late at night, those words echoed in my head. If I wasn't afraid, what would I do? I started testing the boundaries, small steps at first. I spoke a little more honestly, let my opinions slip through in careful doses. But the moment I caught someone raising an eyebrow or giving me a questioning glance, I recoiled, retreating into my carefully built shell. It was exhausting. Living a lie was difficult, but so was trying to break free from it. The fear of rejection loomed over me like a storm cloud, ready to strike the moment I stepped out of line. Could I really handle the consequences of being my true self? The more I tried to hold back, the harder it became. My mind was constantly running in two directions, one side trying to uphold the image expected of me, the other screaming to break free. Conversations became dangerous minefields. When people spoke about beliefs, I had to nod along, even when every fiber of my being disagreed. When someone asked about my aspirations, I gave the safest answer possible, terrified that the truth would slip out. I felt like a stranger in my own life. My interests, my passions, they were all hidden away in the privacy of my room, in secret journals and online forums where I could be myself without fear. But I knew it wasn't enough. I wanted to be open, to live without shame. Yet every time I thought about revealing my truth, the imagined disappointment on my family's faces stopped me. The shame, the guilt, the fear, it all kept me locked in place, a prisoner of my own making. It wasn't a dramatic moment that pushed me to the edge. No grand confrontation, no sudden epiphany. It was something small, something ordinary. I was at a family gathering, listening to my relatives talk about life, values, and expectations. As usual, I stayed silent, nodding along, pretending I agreed. But then, someone turned to me and asked, "And what about you? What do you believe?" The room went quiet. I felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes waiting for my answer. My heart pounded. This was my chance, the perfect moment to finally be honest. It wasn't a dramatic moment that pushed me to the edge. No grand confrontation, no sudden epiphany. It was something small, something ordinary. I was at a family gathering, listening to my relatives talk about life, values, and expectations. As usual, I stayed silent, nodding along, pretending I agreed. But then, someone turned to me and asked, "And what about you? What do you believe?" The room went quiet. I felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes waiting for my answer. My heart pounded. This was my chance, the perfect moment to finally be honest. But I couldn't. I forced a smile, saying exactly what they wanted to hear. The conversation moved on, but I didn't. I felt sick, disgusted with myself. I had spent so long pretending that I had lost track of who I really was. That night I sat in my room, staring at my reflection. "Who am I?" I whispered to myself. I had no answer. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The next day I decided to test the waters. I met with my friend, the only person who had ever questioned my act. I told myself I'd drop small hints, gauge their reaction, and see if maybe, just maybe, I could start being honest with at least one person. But when I sat down across from them, my throat tightened. "There's something I've been wanting to say," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. They looked at me with quiet patience, waiting. It was such a simple thing, just words, just honesty, and yet it felt like trying to lift a mountain. "I don't believe in the things people think I do," I finally admitted. "I've been lying for so long that I don't even know how to stop." My friend didn't recoil, didn't judge. Instead, they simply nodded. "You don't have to lie anymore," they said. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt a weight begin to lift. I had thought I could trust my friend. That was my first mistake. A few days later, I heard whispers, words I had only spoken in confidence being passed around like gossip. The news had spread. My heart pounded as I overheard my name mentioned, followed by words that sent chills down my spine. I heard he's not really one of us. Panic set in. My entire life had been built on maintaining my image. If word spread further, I would lose everything. I confronted my friend, betrayal thick in my voice. "I trusted you," I spat. But they didn't deny it. "You deserve to be yourself," they said simply, "even if it means people knowing the truth." My stomach twisted. I wasn't ready for the truth to be out, but maybe it was already too late. I had thought I could trust my friend. That was my first mistake. A few days later, I heard whispers, words I had only spoken in confidence being passed around like gossip. The news had spread. My heart pounded as I overheard my name mentioned, followed by words that sent chills down my spine. I heard he's not really one of us. I had always feared this moment, and now that it was here, it felt even worse than I imagined. The loneliness was crushing. I had spent years being someone I wasn't, all to avoid this very pain. And yet, despite the isolation, there was something else, a strange, undeniable relief. The truth was out. I didn't have to lie anymore, but I still had one final bridge to cross, telling my family. The night I decided to tell my family, my hands trembled under the dinner table. I could hear the clinking of utensils, the hum of casual conversation, but I was barely listening. My thoughts were too loud, rehearsing every possible way this could go wrong. I cleared my throat, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to say." The table fell silent. Every pair of eyes locked onto me, expectant, oblivious to the storm about to hit. I took a deep breath. "I've been lying to you all my life. I don't believe in what you believe. I don't want the life you expect from me." At first, no one reacted. Then my father's face darkened. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. My younger brother frowned, confusion written all over his face. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken judgment. My father exhaled sharply, setting his glass down with a little too much force. "This is a joke, right?" I shook my head. "It's not." The silence that followed was suffocating. The explosion came all at once. My father slammed his fist on the table, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" His voice shook with rage, but I saw something else in his eyes. Fear, disappointment. My mother, still silent, wiped at her eyes, refusing to look at me. "You've been lying to us this whole time?" she finally whispered, and somehow her quiet devastation hurt more than my father's anger. I swallowed hard. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't keep pretending." My father scoffed. "Then maybe you should go be yourself somewhere else." The words hit like a slap. My brother flinched, but said nothing. My mother finally turned to me, and in her eyes I saw a question she was too afraid to ask. "Are you still my son?" I wanted to tell her yes, that I hadn't changed, but it wouldn't have mattered. In their eyes, I was already a stranger. I had always feared this moment, being cast out, losing everything. But when it finally happened, I didn't feel the panic I expected. I felt empty. I went to my room, grabbed a duffel bag, and started throwing in clothes, my hands moving on autopilot. Footsteps creaked outside my door, then a knock. My mother's voice, soft but hesitant. "Don't go," she said. But I couldn't stop now. I opened the door, and for the first time she really looked at me. Not at the son she wanted, but at the person I had become. "I love you," I told her, "but I can't live a lie anymore." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't stop me as I walked past her. I went downstairs, past the living room, past my father, who didn't even look at me, and out into the cold night. I had no plan, nowhere to go, but at least, for the first time in my life, I was free. The first night was the hardest. I sat in my car staring at my phone, my contact list full of people I couldn't call. I thought I was alone, but then a message appeared. "Where are you?" It was my sister, the one person in my family who had stayed silent during dinner. I hesitated before replying, "I don't know." Moments later, my phone rang. "Come over," she said. "You shouldn't be alone." When I arrived, she didn't ask questions. She didn't demand explanations or try to talk me out of my choices. She just handed me a blanket, let me crash on her couch, and turned on the TV as if it was just another night. "You don't have to fight this battle alone," she said softly before heading to bed. And for the first time since leaving home, I didn't feel like I was drowning. It took months, but eventually I started rebuilding. I got a small apartment, a job, and slowly, piece by piece, started figuring out who I really was. The wounds of my past hadn't healed completely, but I was learning to live with them. My father still refused to speak to me. My mother would call sometimes, her voice full of unspoken words. My sister remained my anchor, the only family who still truly saw me. One evening I stood on my balcony, looking at the city stretching out before me. I had lost a lot, but I had also gained something invaluable: myself. No more lies, no more pretending. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time I was ready to face it, on my own terms.